Welcome to PWS United, a podcast for the Prader-Willi syndrome community, brought to you by PWSA USA. This podcast gives the latest news in research, advocacy, and family support by bringing together staff, volunteers, PWS treatment specialists, biotech and pharmaceutical representatives, caregivers, family members, and individuals with PWS. Our goal is to share education, awareness, and resources with those living with PWS and their supporters. Join us in our mission to enhance the quality of life and empower those affected by Prader-Willi syndrome.
Renowned physician and author Dr. Gabor Mate wrote, "I know for myself that the early hardening of my heart to my own pain shielded me not only from grief, but also from joy. Rediscovering joy, or better yet, discovering it newly, remains part of my life's journey to this day." Perhaps that is the ultimate intention of honoring January as Mental Wellness Month, not just learning how to process and live with our grief, reduce our anxiety, decrease symptoms or inclinations toward depression or addictive behaviors. But how do we rediscover joy? Not just in brief moments, those temporary and fleeting glimpses of life without trauma, struggles, or grief, but how do we cultivate a mind and heart that feels the joy throughout it all and operates from that foundation? Imagine the world we would live in if more people could rediscover joy. On today's podcast, we talk with Denise Rickenbach. Denise is an Adlerian-trained, licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. Denise's interests include addiction, codependency, family systems, anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, grief, life transitions, and strained relationships. And if the name sounds familiar, it's probably because she was a speaker at the 2025 United in Hope Conference, and she is the sister of our beloved parent support coordinator, Christy Rickenbach. Christy and Denise both joined Carrie and I on this episode on mental wellness to talk about what addictive behavior may look like and why parents of individuals with disabilities are perhaps more likely to develop these. We also discuss caregiver burden, and side note, remember to check the show notes for a link to the article mentioned. We also discuss setting limits, why and how, negative comparison versus perspective taking, disenfranchised grief, and more. And if this episode helps you relax some of that tension in your shoulders, lighten your load a bit, or begin to untangle some beliefs and ideas causing you pain and frustration, if it offers you a new perspective or some tools to support and nurture your mental wellness, then may it be a productive step on your own path to rediscovering joy. Denise, thank you for being here to share what you've learned, what your training, all of that stuff. So I'd love to start with the topic of addiction and addictive behaviors, since that seems to be kind of one of your focal points. And I don't know that it's something that we talk about enough. I think, of course, in our society, there's still a stigma around addiction and certain types of addiction. And I think that people can, overlook certain behaviors that are perhaps in that realm. So maybe that's a good place to start if there's like kind of a definition or what addiction may look like.
Yes. So addiction is basically understood. When I do a chemical dependency assessment, we're looking at 11 criteria, and the more criteria you meet, the more severe the substance use disorder would be as it relates to using substances. And so when I'm doing that, we're asking, are you taking the substance or using the behavior in amounts longer or times longer than what you meant to do? Have you wanted to stop or cut down the behavior, but you're not managing to do it? You're spending a lot of time recovering from the use or the behavior. You're experiencing cravings and urges to engage in the behavior or the substance. You're not managing to take care of other responsibilities like school, work, family obligations due to the behavior or the substance use. Continuing the behaviors or use when it's causing problems in relationships. giving up important social, occupational, or recreational activities because of the behavior or the use, you, using the substance or engaging in the behavior again and again, even if it puts you in some kind of danger. For substances, we would most likely think of that as accidents, falls. If it was more of a sexual acting out, unwanted pregnancies, problems in relationships, needing more of the substance or behavior to get the effect you want, so you're doing it more and more, it's increasing, you're developing withdrawal symptoms, which can be relieved by using the substance more. So it's kind of the idea of the hair of the dog. You wake up with a hangover, so you you drink again. And then continuing to use even when you know you have a physical or psychological problem that could have been caused or made worse by the substance or the behavior. And then if you have 2 or 3 of those, it would be considered mild. If you have 4 or 5, it would be moderate, and if you have 6 or more, it would be considered severe. Addiction in a nutshell.
And so that can be applied to a lot of things. So like different behaviors. And I always joke that like mine is chocolate croissants, but I, I think, that is a very real addiction that people have is food, maybe especially in our population.
Well, it's not a specialty I have, but binge eating disorders or elimination disorders like anorexia would be the extreme version of a disordered relationship with food, but, overusing food.
Sorry, just to clarify, I wasn't talking about people with Prader-Willi syndrome having it, but as caregivers and even siblings and people in the house where food has to be so controlled, I imagine that can bring up issues or create tensions in different places.
Yeah. Habits of behaviors with food that wouldn't be typical. You didn't have to have that. Yeah. So the substances usually, if it's a substance use problem, it usually falls into either a sedative, which be alcohol, Xanax, Valium, the things that kind of calm the limbic system. The others are stimulants, so amphetamines, cocaine, things like that, Ritalin, Adderall, things that kind of generate a lot of dopamine, so they're giving you a lot of feel good. And then there's psychoactive ones like marijuana or MDMA, things that
Mhm.
probably are less commonly people addicted to. And then there's the behavioral. So interestingly, I was trained at Adler Graduate School, and Adler was a contemporary of Freud, and they kind of parted ways over motivation. But one of Adler's terms, like he would not like the DSM and everything being a disorder. He just thought like people were overwhelmed. So, but he would say these would go into categories of wasting behaviors. Consuming substances, binge watching TV, shopping, overspending, gambling, over being scrolling on social media, oversleeping, over exercising, things that you're doing to generate or resolve some kind of discomfort or create some good feeling. And so yes, any of those activities out of order tend to get your life out of order. So he had what he called life tasks. And so he was looking at individuals. Are they doing well at work or school? Are they doing well in relationships, partners, family members? And are they somehow doing something meaningful in a greater community? And so that would be another thing to look at with some of these other behaviorals. Is it taking you away from other kind of important functioning areas of your life?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And maybe that's a easier way for people to try and identify it. And I think social media is a big one that most of us are faced with today, whether it's with ourselves or with our children.
Social media is one of the things that I do ask my clients like how much time they're spending on social media because of the waste of the time. You find yourself on there much longer than you had anticipated. One of the things that when I'm working in relationships, I'm always looking for what we call boundary violations. And these would be emotional boundary violations. So that would be yelling, screaming, name calling, criticizing, judging, telling another adult what to do. All of these things are behaviors that generally negatively impact relationships. And social media that's that all day. And so if people are consuming a lot of time in spaces that are really name cally, judgy, criticizing how people are doing things, telling people what they should be doing, that generally negatively impacts someone's mental health.
Yeah. I had a conversation recently with a woman who's like 24 25, I guess. So and she was just kind of explaining the effect of social media, like social media sites like Facebook and Instagram. And she was explaining how being a high school student with access to that and just what it did for her mental health, and just like how if she didn't get as many likes as she wanted, she would take the post down because it wasn't valuable. It didn't mean anything. And yeah, that's just one of my soapboxes is I'm very careful with my kids
Mhm.
and social media, and I worry about the younger generations having access to that.
There's actually an author named, I think it's Jonathan Haidt, and he has a book out recently called The Anxious Generation, where he addresses and the research on social media. And he actually makes recommendations for parents if anybody's interested in dabbling. I don't remember offhand what they were, but he would like phones banned in school, is the thing that I remember most.
Love it. So, do you have any tools, or are there, if people see themselves kind of going down this path, if people are noticing that they're too reliant on these behaviors, or they're starting to have these kind of addictive behaviors, are there tools that you recommend, special support that you recommend?
Yeah. When we're working with people that are having a behavior they're wanting, we kind of start looking for patterns, like when do you find yourself? What are your triggers? So you want to start to have a lot of awareness around what is sometimes like, why do I find myself drinking coffee at 3 in the afternoon? And then if it's a problem for you, and then you're wanting to identify sometimes things you can do instead. There's a concept called urge surfing, and the research on that is that if you give an urge or a craving a certain amount of time while you put your attention on something else, a lot of times it will resolve. Some of the concepts we use with cravings from an addiction standpoint is it feels really big when it's happening, like get this thing, do this thing, use this thing. But if you can develop a relationship, there's researches with enough intention and time, you can kind of bypass the urge. But yeah, calling a friend instead, sit and do a yoga pose. We try to find something that people can do that they enjoy that's not negatively impacting them.
I will say, Annie, I suffered from many coffees a day, just to go back to your example. And I've learned that a walk in the middle of the day gives me the energy that a coffee in the afternoon would have. So try to like replace it with something else, but maybe a little better for you in some way, but still give you that awake feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will definitely walk with coffee. It's a great
There you
idea. I'll
go.
add a walk in my coffee. That's great.
Yeah, just introduce good habits, right? I think that's what a lot
Yeah.
of people say. Bring in like the greens before you just cold turkey cut out all the sweets, all that.
We do not wanna see me without the coffee. It would be bad. It'd be bad for everybody involved, so
Yeah, and I think as it relates to things like building in the healthy habits, like setting yourself up, people like put the workup clothes by the door, so that when you get up in the morning, you put them on. Our brains will look for any excuse to avoid something at times. So the more you can do to like push yourself in that direction. And the other thing I found is people want to wait for motivation, and it's really in some it's a discipline. And so becoming more disciplined. There's a research or a type of therapy, it's called internal family systems, and the developer kind of started to notice that people would talk to him about their parts, like part of me thinks this and part of me thinks that. And so he talks about all these parts that will try to distract us and avoid us, but we have this inner wise self. And so you're wanting to develop practices where this inner wise self is more in control and decision making, and call it parenting ourselves, because these little parts want to like run us off. So just developing, in fact, there's a podcast called The Adult Chair, and it's the same concept. Like we don't want these young kind of wily parts running our lives. We want to kind of have that wise adult self making the decisions as much as possible. Yeah, it's a difficult world to always live in. There's just so many distractions. When you were
Yeah.
talking about social media and your friend, I was thinking often I will tell my clients, like from a evolutionary standpoint, for the most of human existence, we lived in small tribes. And so the most you interacted with on any given day was 50 to 100 people, depending on where you lived. And now we We have data available 24/7. We can see what all the celebrities are doing all day long. We're just not really built to be doing that. So the more you can take care of yourself by not putting yourself in the positions, the better your mental health will be. One more thing, if it's okay,
Oh,
about
please.
tendencies for people with just the research I found on why somebody with a special needs child might be more predisposed to substance use or other behavioral addictions. I found some research and it was called caregiver burden. And so I think it might be interesting for, you and the community to say they broke the research down into five burdens. One was the time dependence burden, and the people in the study just were reporting the time dependence because many care recipients require constant care. It's not a
Mhm.
break. There was a developmental burden, so social life suffers, and many of them responded to the feeling they're missing out on life. The third was a physical burden, so just reporting lack of sleep, general fatigue, causing more possibly physical ramifications. The fourth was the social burden. So this was either they reported conflict with family members or partners, and sometimes even reduced job performance. So that was sometimes. And then the fifth was emotional burden. So they would endorse having resentments towards sometimes the care recipients and or other loved ones. And then feeling isolated, to finding it difficult to entertain, have people over, things like that. And what that research found was the first 3 were a problem, but it was really the social burden and the emotional burden that people identified as increased drinking. So that is just one thing
Mhm.
I thought you guys might put in your pot and stir as it relates to to some of the substance use or behavioral.
That does speak so clearly to the experience. And actually, I was thinking, because I just had therapy right before this, and I was like, oh my God, this is like an extension of the session I just had. But we'll get into that later, the grief. But I think those are all really important for people to be aware of because they're all so true and so real. And I think sometimes we can overlook how burned out we actually are. Because it's kind of, because you said caregiver burden, which I'm guessing is like caregiver burnout. Like it's kind of all this of the same, it's all in the same pot being stirred together, right?
Yeah, so they called it caregiver burden, and then they called it care recipient need. So I don't know if you think it would be helpful just to I mean, I felt myself really thinking it was pretty courageous that people were actually being honest, that sometimes
Mhm.
you feel resentful towards the person that needs the care, and just knowing I don't have a special needs child, but the amount of conflict that my husband and have just getting on the same page as parenting, has the potential for being increased if you're caring for somebody that's, has special needs. So I don't know.
Well, and I think in general, right, parenting is hard, right? Trying to make sure you're making the right decisions. Suddenly you throw in there all these medical decisions that you have to make, and it's taking up so much time away from your spouse, away from your other children, away from your friends or whatever, and pretty soon you realize that you've kind of isolated yourself. And I know that this happens to a lot of people. I can speak from personal experience, right? I have friends that I used to do things with all the time, and I'm like, well, I have to find somebody for justice to be with if I'm gonna do that, so it's just easier to say no. So there is the whole burnout thing. I mean, yesterday I spent 2 hours on the phone trying to get growth hormone for Justice. 2 hours and 6 minutes, not that I was counting, but at the end of that call, no resolution. They said, "Call back tomorrow after 1 and we'll work on it again."
Wow. Wow.
So, what I mean? Just things like that, and I think people don't realize unless they have done it, unless they have been there, they don't realize how taxing that is on every part of you, right? Because in the background, Justice is like, "Are you gonna make lunch?" "Yeah, hold on." Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So there's like and then I'm trying to work, and then, my other kids are calling me because one of my grandkids needed glasses, and they were concerned about all these different things are going on, and my phone's going off, and I'm sitting there going like, "I can't do this."
Mhm.
So it's real. It's real. So I'm glad you brought that up, Denise. Thank you.
Well, and I think that when you were saying that 2 hours and 6 minutes, I was like, "Oh god, I would have wanted to have a beer afterwards." I would have been like, "I'm having a beer. I earned this." There's something about that, like, it's like those behaviors, those vices that we have are kind of that fast track to that dopamine hit that we need or whatever. I don't know if dopamine's the right word, but it is like that. We just don't have a lot of time to do. We can't do an hour of yoga and relax and get to that place. Like we need a quick fix. I need that chocolate croissant stat because I need something to make me feel good right now because I don't have time.
Exactly. I'm gonna be honest, I did think, I'm like, "I could use a shot of something." I did honestly, that went through my head, and I'm like, "I'd have to go to the store and get it." I don't actually have time to go to a store and get it, so, you know what I mean? I mean, there was a lot of thought process going on there, but I did not have a shot. You'll be happy to know.
Well, and I just wanna go on record as I don't as even though I work in the field of addiction, I don't really have problems with people having caffeine and alcohol. I just get concerned when it's starting to negatively impact their lives, and, that's where I'm here to support people. I have my share of alcohol and sugar as well. It's not derailing my life, and it's not impacting my mental health negatively, so those are always the things I'm looking for, is what's the consequence. The next thing that we were going to talk about, and I look at it as under the umbrella of relational stressors. And so, I don't think that many people maybe look at their relationships, or maybe they do more consciously, as causing anxiety in their lives. But I find that to be commonly true is some our relationships are causing elevated levels of adrenaline and cortisol, which brings me to what I like to use as my expandable ball. And I use this as a model of the limbic system. And I tell my clients, your limbic system likes to be nice and small, and it's very sensitive to criticism and other people's agendas. And when it senses that, it floods you up with adrenaline and cortisol and puts you into fight or flight, because you have this sense that I either need to run or fight. And so, what happens in relationships, not only with all of our families, but in walking through this journey with Christy and Justice, and all of the ways in which the food impacts their lives, and how much people that you love don't get it. Christy and I have talked sometimes about things that I've witnessed, where a family member that's really honestly a good person and really loves Justice but doesn't get it, and has thought that Justice was going to be coached out of some of this. Like, with enough coaching, the food wouldn't be an issue. Or Christy was being unreasonable, and it's ruining, her experience as a family member to not give, Justice a cookie or ice cream or things like that. And knowing Christy's experience of having felt criticized and angry and sad sometimes when people that she cares about either can't understand or aren't willing to understand, that leads me to the setting limits. And so, what I would say in watching Christy, and you can share whatever you want, everybody else, but that every family has its traditions, every culture has its traditions. And then Christy's family made to go into the culture while still protecting Justice. And so, knowing, how to set limits with the family members about what Justice is able to have, or even knowing you're going to be managing their upset or their disappointments if you bring special food for them. And so I work with my clients a lot on, like, setting limits is I say, the love letter you give yourself. You're taking care of yourself, but nobody really likes it or appreciates it. We want to manage outcomes. We want to do or say the thing that makes everybody get it and everything calm and chill. But really, what I work with my clients to learn to do is to do the next right step and detach from the outcomes. And so sometimes I will draw a very crude sketch of a tennis court with a line down the middle, and I will have, draw a stick figure of my client on one side and whatever relationship is on the other side. And I will talk to them about how you're responsible for everything on your side of the court, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions. And to the degree that you care about the other person, you care about their thoughts, feelings, and actions, but you're not responsible for them. You are responsible for how you send a message. So I work with my clients on, whenever you decide what the message is, how do you say it with respect, even if they're not going to like it? I'll use an example of going to a family member's house, and it would be something like, listen, I know you've gone to a great deal of work to prepare all this, but really, this is what Justice can have today. And that's a really well sent message. It's brief, it's, informative, it's friendly, and it's firm. I talk about BIF all the time, like, let's figure out your BIF. It doesn't mean that the person's going to like your biff or even respond to it well. And so I prepare people to respond to the response. Because hardly ever does somebody say, "Oh, thank you. Until you said that, I just had no idea. You've enlightened me." They usually do one of two things, which is they attack you further, like you're unreasonable or you make too big of a deal of things, or they shift into, I call it martyr mode, where I can't do anything right. And whatever I provide, it's not the right thing. I'm a terrible fill in the blank. And so I help my clients to kind of work on their response to the response. And like, yes, I hear that I've disappointed you, but unfortunately, this is what justice needs. Or I'm not saying this to make you angry. This is just really important for justice. What I found when I do it doesn't usually solve the problem, but they usually go away and they usually don't kick me out of their life. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or responses to any of that.
That's actually something that my mom does. If there's a conversation she doesn't think will go well with, like, my brother, for example, she'll reach out to me and ask if I can have it instead because she thinks it will come from a better place and resonate with him much better and make him more open to, the conversation and the outcome that needs to happen from it. So, yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that is a helpful tool that you could hopefully or potentially tap into if needed. Great advice.
I have found that no matter how many times I explain things, like Denise has said, there's some people that are just never going to get
Yeah.
it. So I have taken Denise's advice because I used to, it honestly would just hurt my heart. And I'd be like, I'm just not going anymore. Well, that's really not that's not feasible, right? Because I don't wanna give up going to family events or going to friend's house or whatever, and so now it's like I no longer take their feelings personally. If they're upset, sorry it upset you, but my daughter's well-being or whoever it may be, right? It could be any of my family members. I'm going to do what is best for them, and it's on them to then either figure it out or be mad at me, and I don't care anymore. I just can't. I can't be upset about it anymore because I have to do what's right for my family.
Yeah. That's so fair and so well said. And I think a lot of people feel that. Yeah.
When did a lot of my training with a gentleman named Terry Real, and he has a number of books out. And there was one I can remember reading, and I don't remember the book, but I was highlighting. He said, "We've all spent our life since we were children trying to make everything smooth and calm and please everybody, make sure everybody's okay. And then we realize I'm not that powerful." If only. So he would say, "You got to let the bad thing happen." We've all been trying to like say it the right way and kind of come around this corner or go over that. And he's like, just do the thing and let the bad thing happen. And then I work with my clients because we call it the inner child. It's the inner child that thinks that we're not going to be able to stand it. And a lot of times we've gone through enough life that we've had the bad things happen and we're still alive. So I work with people that are going through this and they have that hurt part. It's kind of a pathway that you've worn in your brain that these people must be pleased with me. And if they're not, I can't stand it. So that's a pathway, a belief. And so when you're really going to this is what cognitive behavioral therapy is it's identifying distorted beliefs and then challenging them and replacing them with reality.
Mm.
And so you sometimes do have to take some time after a hurtful situation. You've done your biff, you've taken care of your kid, and you're feeling where you kind of go to that small part of yourself and you sue that you like, listen, you can't please everybody. And just because somebody doesn't agree with me doesn't mean you did something wrong. So you kind of start replacing some of those beliefs with, as an adult, know now as reality. Like, I can actually live a meaningful life while my mother-in-law is not happy with me on any given day. In fact, my father-in-law, he doesn't believe in therapy. When I went into the field of therapy, I'm surprised he didn't say something, but he didn't. But as I kind of kept in the field, one day I was at the house and he said, "What are people looking for from you?" And I was just like, that's about the rudest thing anybody's ever said. And I love
Oh
my
my gosh.
father-in-law. And so I just said, perspective, practices. Like, I try to give him a few things, but I don't need his approval to live my life, to do what I need to do. And so I think that's kind of what I'm reinforcing as it's setting limits, is really knowing You don't need to explain. You can. I mean, I like that Christy explained to me what's going on. It's helped me to know. But once you've explained and they're not going to change, knowing it's okay to set limits, manage expectations as it's related to that person, stop being surprised every time they do that same thing. So it's kind of just getting people kind of oriented to how life actually is versus how we'd hoped it would be, which kind of does lead to the conversation of grief. There's a saying, I think it's her name is Dr. Joan Rosenberg, that I heard say that anytime life does not turn out how you expected, you grieve. And so that can show up in a lot of ways how you had hoped relationships would be. In our workshop on disenfranchised grief, there's a lot of a part of a grieving process, even navigating special needs, having a special needs child, which is totally normal, and which also falls in line to one of the other things that negatively impacts mental health, which is comparing. And so we talked a lot about like the tendency to compare, and it's not, you don't do it because you're a bad person. You're honestly just trying to figure things out. So you're comparing how somebody else is managing things or doing things. And so as much as it relates to your situation and grieving and trying to figure out how to find good, trusted advice without getting fallen into the comparison trap, I don't know if that's what your thoughts are on even grief or that tendency to compare, if that's a thing.
Yeah. Well, so many things that you've said, I wanted to like touch on, but on the comparison thing, I know that I compare, and sometimes I tend to do it. I think I don't know if a healthy way, but in a way that helps me. If I'm really struggling with something, my thoughts will kind of go, "Well, I'm not doing this. Like it's not this bad. It's not as bad as that." That feels like a healthy way to use comparison, but I brought that up to my therapist, and I don't know that she was convinced. So I don't know.
No,
What do you?
I call it the difference between negative comparison and perspective taking. So I feel like when you're kind of trying to give somebody a perspective, sometimes we're like, this is the worst thing ever. And then somebody's saying, well, actually, have you thought about how horrible this would be? Like, so it's like trying to give somebody perspective versus comparing yourself and one of us is falling short. Cause that's what a lot of times happens in comparisons is like, I'm either falling short or, oh, if you're on the other end where they shouldn't be doing that. It can kind of have a different feel where it shifts almost into judgment instead of just you're judging yourself or someone else. I always say you can't help what you notice. You can only help what you do next. And so noticing a difference is different than condemning yourself or the other person. Cause then, and I notice all the time things that was strange or I wouldn't do it like that, but I kind of keep it there instead of in my mind like, oh, why I to myself or my kid would never do that. I'm just like, interesting. I have no idea what's going on past what I just saw. So yeah, I think noticing versus either comparing or trying to give somebody kind of a perspective check. Yeah, and I guess I only heard from some of the families there that and I'm speaking at the Prader-Willi conference, is just that every person, despite their, disorder, their timelines are so different, and so comparing can be a real trap.
I was going to say this is a great opportunity to remind, put back out there that everyone's journey with PWS is different. Not one story is the same, not one experience is really the same. So, yeah, I'm sure the comparison is so prevalent and real, but I think just keeping that on top of mind is important to do. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, when you have typical kids, you compare, right? Like,
Mm.
my gosh, my friend's baby walked at 8 months old, and my kid's 12 months and not walking. So, you compare that. And then all of a sudden things are even more delayed or people are feeding their kids different than what you did. So I think it's really important, right, to kind of decide which doctors am I going to listen to? Which diet plan am I going to listen to? And I guarantee you, it is not a group on Facebook that should be telling you what medically you should do for your child. I'm just throwing that out there,
Here,
right? That
here.
I
Yes.
think that it's really important, right? I mean, because every child is different. If I told some families what Justice ate, they would be like, "What?" But that's what works for her, right? So I think you need to find out what works for you, what works for your family, what works for your child, because your child is far more than just PWS. There's a whole lot of other DNA that is going on inside of that child, and the amount of activity, the amount of things that they are doing or hope to do. So I just think that it's really important that when you start comparing diet or activity levels, just remember that they're a whole child. It's not just PWS. And so you can't take just one small snippet that you might see on Facebook or Instagram or whatever and have that be the gospel. That's not it.
Hmm. Thanks for saying that, Kristen.
That's
Yeah.
let's put that on a bumper sticker. So I don't know if we're gonna fit it.
It's a really long bumper sticker. I hope it's a long red light so people can read that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think you have to sometimes take a step back and look and go, is that really a PWS thing? And I know that's all where we always want to just like jump to, right? We always want to because it's easiest, right? It's like, oh, that's happening because of this. Well, it could be because of puberty. It could be because there's changes in their home. It could be because, who knows? There's always something that could be happening that affects our kids that we just don't even take note of. So I was just talking with a friend and I was like, sometimes we just have to sit down and like talk things through. Like, what caused you to do that? Was there a better way we could have said that? Fortunately for me, Justice has Denise. And so Justice goes and spends time with Denise and gets to like talk a lot of things through. And so Denise knows exactly how crazy I can be, but it's good. It's all good.
You haven't met criteria for anything terrible. Craziness.
Thank goodness, not terrible yet. Whew.
I'm not concerned. No, I think that this is the first time I've heard anybody talk about temperament as it relates to being separate from the PWS. And every family has family norms. And so some people's behaviors can come just from what the family rules were. So I'm always looking at what was your family of origin, what was considered normal, then what's your temperament. And so I don't know. I've never talked to anybody that, people tend to be either fight or flight. They're flight types or they're fight types. And I don't know if that shows up with any of the kids with the Prader-Willi syndrome.
I think
No.
our kids, unfortunately, are often in just flight. Seriously, fight and flight. You know what I mean? Like everything is such a big, everything is hard for them, right? Because emotion irregulation, yeah,
Mhm.
that's right, is really, really difficult, right? So I can say, oh, we're going to go do this. And then plans change. And with Justice, it took us a long time to get to the point where she'll be like, okay, so explain to me why did the plans change? And as long as we can talk it through. But if I were to just be like, because I said so, I mean, that's going to be really hard, right? She's not going to understand that. For you or for a lot of people, they'd be like, all right, well, that sucks. Moving on. I'll just go do something else. For our kids, they get very set, like this is what we're planning. This is what we're doing. This is what I'm expecting to do. And when it doesn't happen, it can be really hard. So that whole emotional regulation thing is it's a hard I think that's probably one of the hardest things.
Mhm.
That's the hardest thing for us by far is the emotional regulation. And as someone who is working on my own emotional regulation, when you put the two of us together and I'm supposed to support her emotional regulation, it's challenging. And to speak to your father-in-law who, doesn't believe in therapy or whatever, I grew up in Southern Indiana with very stoic parents. And so therapy was never really on my radar for many years and decades. And now I'm about 5 months into this woman that I absolutely adore. And it's incredible and amazing. And so this is my PSA for people to give it a shot.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times, especially if it's your family and then, you feel like things are normal. So talking to somebody outside the system and outside your experience, like it can provide a lot of like relief and validation that, no wonder I'm so overwhelmed. And when I'm talking to people about relationships that are challenging and I start lying out from like, well, there's a lot of yelling and name calling, like there's a reason you guys are having the stressors you have because these are considered emotional boundary violations. So working on, reworking how conflict is managed and just when you don't have the perspective, you can't see the problem. You're just in the same dance all the time and you keep getting into it. And so having somebody kind of show you the dance and what your moves have been and like helping you redo the dance so it's a lot less painful. Yeah, I think talking to someone outside your system with a little expertise can be helpful.
And it's amazing what sometimes just saying things out loud can do, right? You're like, wow, that seemed really bad. And then you say it out loud, you're like, oh, okay, I really feel stupid about even like worrying about that, you know? But I saw a therapist for quite some time. It actually was very beneficial to have someone to just bounce things off of. Sometimes they said nothing, and at the end of the day, I'm like, "You just made your money because I talked for an entire hour," you know? Like, and like, yeah. So, I'm with Annie. Find a therapist, talk with somebody. It's very beneficial.
My mom is my unpaid therapist, so you could also turn to a family member if that floats your boat.
I used to talk with my mom. She was always a very good listener, but
Mhm.
then I had to pay somebody.
Yeah.
I know some people who are in therapy because of their mothers, but, it's a difference.
We're all different. Yeah.
Can we go back to the grief for a minute? Just because as I was writing up some notes from talking with you yesterday, and just with some things that you've said, I am a big fan of Gabor Mate, and he talks about big T trauma, little T trauma. And like that's kind of a good analogy, I think, for our experience. I mean, people in general, of course, but the big G grief and the little G grief, like what does that look like, and how I think it's important for us to recognize that we do have that and we carry that around. And maybe that is disenfranchised grief, that kind of like recurring, ever present. It's not always this big sad event, but like all the little griefs that we experience throughout the day or whatever. So I don't know. Can you explain the disenfranchised grief a little bit?
Yeah, so I think our culture doesn't do grief well as other cultures do in general, making the time and space for it. But most people, if you lose a loved one, people get that loss and you're going to get a lot of support. You're going to get some cards in the mail and you're going to get gifts and food and everybody's going to publicly recognize and acknowledge it. And then the disenfranchised grief are the kind of pain you're carrying around that nobody knows about because there was no announcement or funeral. And so having a special needs child is one of them that people don't understand the amount of things you're grieving, getting a diagnosis you didn't expect, and then being on this trajectory, this learning curve that's challenging, and you're learning all of these things there's a range of possibilities. So there's so much uncertainty along with the grief. And then the milestones that, over the course of time, you start to, our systems are really like they notice a lot. And so just things will happen that will kind of ping, oh, that's not going to happen for my child. And that's another little time where the future is not what you had anticipated and your system recognizes that and that generates a sadness. So yeah, over the course of time, the grief I'm sure starts more intense and then there's times it's less and then times it's more again, part of the grieving process. And other ones I talk about, it's not just a special needs child. There's people struggling with infidelity. Nobody knows it. There's people who are like having fertility challenges, but there's no generally recognized acknowledgement of that. So there's just different things that are the disenfranchised or ambiguous grief, not as clear cut. And so, yeah. And we did talk a lot about grief at the workshop. And one of the commenters or questioners afterwards, I, I didn't ask specifically, but the question was sometimes like, how do you manage your experience with your child with them knowing like that they are the source of grief? But I think it was like there's grief in all relationships, so all of our relationships wherever there's disconnects or personality differences or we have different, I'm always talking with my partner and when in couples, like how to get into alignment because they don't like the same things you like. And so there can be this sense of grief over, I thought we would do this thing and they have no interest in it. So like children, they will put you through a lot of grief no matter they're typically developing or special needs. And so I think Christy was like, even though there's grief related to relationship, it's not the primary part of the relationship necessarily. Do you remember that at
Yep.
all, Christy?
Yeah, I do. I do remember that because I remember that question kind of threw me off too because I was like, wow, I was not expecting that at all. But it was a great question, right? Because from experience, I can also say that so with justice, right? Right as soon as I knew that she was able to start understanding things, we started talking about things. I tried to explain to her why things were hard, why she had to do things that were different than maybe her siblings or her peers or whatever, just to let her know that yes, things were going to be different. Things might be a little bit harder, but that didn't make her life any less than, right? I wanted to make sure that she knew that even if it looked like I was maybe tired, like I got off the phone yesterday after 2 hours and 6 minutes, not that I was counting. And I said, I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And she's like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to do that for me." And she honestly felt bad, right? And I'm like, "Justice, I don't think you understand. I am not in any way upset that I had to do this for you. I'm upset that I had to do this for you, that they were being so difficult, that every year it's so difficult. It had nothing to do with you. And I would do it for any of my other children. I would do anything for any of my children, right? But I think kind of going back too is that right from the beginning, I let Justice know that she is loved for exactly who she is, right? And it took actually a neurologist telling me, he's like, Christy, what are you doing? Right? Justice is never going to know anything other than having Prader-Willi syndrome. So you need to love her for exactly who she is, and she's going to love herself, but if I'm sad, she's going to be sad. But I think with this, when this person asks this question, I think letting them know that they are not the source of the stress, right? That their being is not some of the things that come along with that, but some of the things that come along with having a spouse or other children, as we all know, right? All of our children bring different issues, different problems that we have to deal with. So I hope that answered that, Denise. I just went off on a whole rampage.
Well, and I think that's the one thing too is like I have children that aren't special needs that have caused me a lot of grief. So it's like the two are not necessarily associated just specifically. And I do think that she was concerned, like she felt like some shame related to having grief related to her child. And so trying to normalize, well, relationships in general just have grief as some of the components, and it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong.
No. And I think that's something that we all kind of have to go through, right? I mean, grief is cyclical. And so, I mean, there are times where I'll just be like, "Oh my goodness, this is hard." And then I realize, you know what? Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and everything's going to be just fine. There are definitely days that are harder than others, and a lot of the times it's because I'm worried about her. I'm worried about Justice. I'm worried about what her future is going to be like, and so I have to sometimes stop and go, you know what? Why are you feeling bad for yourself, right? This has nothing to do with me. And Justice is perfectly happy. I mean, she is perfectly happy. She loves her life. So what am I grieving? What am I being sad about? Right. And sometimes to just kind of put that into perspective. But yeah, we've always been so open and honest with Justice, and making sure that she knew that she is not the cause of any stress. It's things that just come along with having any diagnosis, having any medical appointments, having any sort of insurance issues. It could be for any one of my children, and I would do the same thing, but has nothing to do with her as a person.
Well, I think as it relates to grief and grief counseling, what a person who's grieving needs comfort. And so a lot of times that can be you can comfort yourself on certain days, like just acknowledging to yourself, like, this has been a challenging day. It's nobody's fault. I would say some of the same things to myself that I would say to another person that I see, that's grieving, like, this was hard and you showed up." Like, like some of the things you can actually call a comforting person and get comfort from another thing. There's other things people do to find comfort, doing things that feel soothing. If you're a person that likes baths and, go take a bath, take a walk. I'm not a journaler, but there's some people who find it helpful to like journal what's going on, so they're getting it out. But yeah, the main sorts of comfort that I have found useful are learning how to be the compassionate person to myself and comfort myself sometimes, or if there's someone that gets it. Like I have a couple of people in my life that they just get it. They're safe for me to like be vulnerable and honest, and they're not going to like try to get me to look at the bright side or fix the situation. They're going to bring a certain amount of comfort.
I sometimes use our staff chat for that when I'm really struggling with something with Freya. I'm like, they'll understand.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing for me is I find people struggle the most when people are well-meaning, but if they don't understand, they can actually make it worse. And so just giving yourself permission to, like, I call them, sort them. These are the helpful and these are the unhelpful people. And it doesn't mean they're bad. They're just not helpful. And then I kind of give myself good support as a part of taking care of myself. Because it's very negatively impacts your mental health when someone is not helpful. Because you already felt punched and then you got punched again. It's just not great.
Yeah, I think it's so important to find people that understand, right? And so there are a lot of things in life people have gone through that I will never understand. And I can be a listening ear, but I cannot understand, you know? So finding those people that understand what you're going through, that aren't trying to, like Denise said, to fix things, because there's some things that cannot be fixed. I just sometimes need someone to listen to me. And again, you talk it out and you're like, all right, actually, that's not so bad. I'll just go make a cup of coffee and move on. We're good. We're good. But finding those people is very important.
And nothing feels quite as dismissive as trying to be someone fix you.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves, like, "Really? Are you really? Did you just say that? Because that's not helpful, but that's alright. It's alright."
When we were talking about how to navigate experiences when people criticize us, that was something we were talking about yesterday. This thing came up from when Freya was younger, and I remember one of the dads called me a helicopter parent. And, like, for some reason, that has stuck with me. That just made me think of that. When people just really don't get it, and then they wanna offer advice or tell you that you're doing it wrong, and it's just yeah.
Well, this is something I don't think that Christy and I have ever talked about it, but it's the idea of hypervigilance. And so when I'm working with clients, I'm like trying to see if they're too hypervigilant, like they're coding how serious a problem is. But with Prader-Willi syndrome, like I think hypervigilance is probably the name of the game at sometimes. Like there's so much to be paying attention to, things that cannot be missed, and other people just aren't gonna get it.
But like Denise, you do get, like, because when we come over to your house, like, I can finally kind of relax, right? Because I know that Denise is gonna help me with, make sure that justice is safe or whatever situation. And there's very few people that I honestly feel comfortable where I can just be like, totally, I will not even look up from my phone. Yes, doom scrolling on social media. That's what I do. And I know that I don't have to worry about it. So I just think it's important to try to find those people. But we do have to be hyper vigilant. And I think as far as limbic systems, ours never turns off. It is a
Mhm.
constant on to make sure that, every base is covered, right? If if
It
your
has
child is
serious implications.
yeah, I mean, if your child is a
Um,
food seeker, you are on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because you cannot take a chance on forgetting to lock something up, or, that they might elope, or I mean, the consequences are so dire in some instances that it's really important that you find someone that you can talk to about this, find somebody that you feel safe with, that even if you can get a 20-minute reprieve from having to do that, it's really important.
And this is an observation for me, like, it's shocking to me still, but there's some people that don't think that they should have to make accommodations, like, and where I'm like, it's the easiest thing to do is to put all the food out of sight. It's not that hard, but there's some people that I don't know if it's a stubbornness, so I don't know if that's something that's our family or common, but it's shocked me, the number of people that just don't have the simple willingness to, like, clear the counters, like, is it
Yeah.
really that big of a hurdle? So I do think finding somebody that you trust that gets it, if you can, is you're not exaggerating things.
No. And it's a life or death sort of thing, right? In a lot of situations. So, yeah, the fact that people really don't want to take time to understand that. Like family gatherings, eat and then put the food away. And there's some family members that are like, but we like to graze all day long. I'm like, well, then we have to leave, right? Because it's not that I necessarily even worry that in our case, that Justice will go and take the food, but it actually causes her real anxiety, right? The anxiety is so great that she's not having any fun. I'm not having any fun. So why in the world am I here? So we have left many
Mhm.
times places just because the anxiety is just too much.
There's
Mhm.
also people who food is their, like, love language, like my mother-in-law, who literally shows her affection and care through food. Think it's unfortunately the case where a lot of people are at least some people that I know, whose love language is food, and they really want to share their affection by making you food for any scenario possible. So, yeah, I'm sure that's a struggle as well out there. Oof.
I have a family member whose love language is food, right? And
Mm.
so they once said to me, like, "What is one cookie gonna harm?" And we ended up in a very large argument over one cookie. And I'm thinking,
Mm.
this was this was years ago, but still, it's like people need to understand boundaries. And if somebody says, like, if your child was diabetic, and you're like, "Please don't give them a cookie," they're diabetic. You'd be like, "Oh, okay, I won't do that." So I think people need to really respect what parents are saying and doing, because we do know what is best for our kids. It's not like we want to, like, put them in a box and, like, you can't have that because I just feel like being mean. That is not the case at all.
Or
So,
that you're depriving your child.
yeah. And seriously, there's a lot of things that could be worse than them not having a cookie. I'm just saying. Play a game of Uno with them. They would love that. And it lasts longer.
Yeah.
A lot longer.
I will say one final word on setting limits, because Christy kind of mentioned it. Like, you can make a request, but a limit is something you can control. So if you try to set limits and they don't respect your limit is like what she said. Because if they don't respect your limits, then you leave. You do the thing that you can control. And some people get really stuck on setting boundaries has nothing at all to do with what they're going to do. It has to do with what I'm going to do if they don't respect the limits. And it doesn't have to be done meanly. I've never seen, Christy leave a gathering in a huff with a big, a big lecture or anything. You just kind of quietly go take care of yourself and control what you can.
Thank you for listening to this episode of PWS United. If you want to learn more about Prader-Willi syndrome and how PWSA USA is making strides in advocacy, family support, and research, visit www.pwsausa.org. And while you're there, we encourage you to sign up for our Pulse email newsletter to stay informed about the latest news, resources, and events. Don't forget to subscribe to the PWS United podcast so you never miss an episode. Our team is always available to support families and their loved ones living with PWS 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can call us at 941-312-0400 or email info@pwsausa.org. Catch a new episode next Tuesday, and until then, have a great week.